drones that are effectively being used as sniper weapons. The drone is worth a couple of $1,000, the tank is worth a couple of $1 million, and the drone is winning. US investment in it will be huge, and that'll take what the Ukrainians have developed to the next level. I don't think it's just the US Army that's deciding now is the right time to invest in its drone capabilities. I think it's armies around the world who've been watching what's going on in Ukraine and a couple of conflicts that were going on around the world before that. But US has always invested heavily in drones, but it's been the bigger drones. It's been their surveillance drones, but some of them are armed surveillance drones with sophisticated missile systems. Where Ukraine is different is the use of smaller drones that are effectively being used as sniper weapons, whether that be from an anti-personnel perspective, where grenades are dropped on people, or an anti-tank perspective or anti-armored vehicle perspective, where we're seeing the FPV drones being flown into them. And this has brought a new dimension and a new weapon system into warfare. That's not unusual. That happens over history frequently. Well, I think it's the use of drones in Ukraine that has woken people up to the impact that they can have on the battlefield. So whenever you're looking at it from an anti-personnel perspective, they're dropping effectively grenades onto individuals or small groups of enemy troops, Russian troops. You can do that out to 1.5, 2 kilometers with a drone, whereas if you've got an individual throwing a grenade, how far can you throw a cricket ball? That's about what it's like. So it's giving you that much bigger reach. And that's in effectively giving you longer range anti-personnel sniper capability. The same thing happens whenever you've got armored vehicles and you can put anti-tank weapon systems onto FPV drones, and they're flown into either armored vehicles or soft skin vehicles and destroy those vehicles. And we're seeing quite effectively some of the most sophisticated Russian tanks, their T-90s, being hit by an FPV drone. The drone is worth a couple of $1,000, the tank is worth a couple of $1 million, and the drone is winning. I don't think the change is down to the growing tensions that are around the world. I think it's the needs must. The one thing that happens in conflict is people adapt how you fight, what you fight with, depending on what you have. And Ukraine, whenever Russia carried out its full-scale invasion, had light anti-armor weapons, a lot of them provided by the UK, by the Americans. It had relatively light weapons and then a lot of old Soviet type kit that has proved very unreliable, and they needed the West to supply them even more. But in the interim phase, they've identified that they can destroy and hold back the Russians by the use of new technologies coming in and using them in a different way and getting commercial off-the-shelf drones, using them first and foremost from a surveillance perspective. Then they realized that they could drop things from them and drop explosives. And then they realized that actually with the FPV drones, with your goggles, they're powerful enough to put an anti-armor weapon in there, and you can fly them into vehicles, whether it be armored or soft skin vehicles, and have an effect there. And that capability has just grown enormously. And then the technology within the drones is changing because, as they've moved from commercial off-the-shelf drones through to ones that they're building themselves. A lot of the electronics change. The frequencies that are being used to control the drones from your drone controller and pass the imagery back and put the controls out are changing because Russian electronic warfare has been able to stop the off-the-shelf drones from getting to different places. And now we're finding that it's getting even more sophisticated with the use of long spool fiber optic cables over tens of kilometers that are being used to control the drones so that they don't get they don't suffer electronic warfare and can be put into the targets without being interfered with electronically. Investment in drones, not just the US, but I think every army is looking at this. It's understanding now how these cheap, easy to build, easy to operate drones can have a massive effect when you're dealing with massed armor or massed vehicles or massed people in a way that we relied on artillery beforehand, on our mortars beforehand, on fixed wing or rotary wing air beforehand, or then our own armored vehicles carrying out an anti-armor attack. And we can do it over a much longer range. These drones have ranges out to 2, 5, 10 kilometers in some cases, and you can have them surveilling the area and identifying where threats are coming from, looking at where you can then swarm an area with drones that have this anti-personnel capability or anti-vehicle capability, and then in surveilling the area you can carry out your battle damage assessment and work out whether you need to re-attack it or otherwise. That's always been very difficult, and this is where the drones and the development of drone technology has changed the nature of what's going to happen in on the battlefield. But again, this is not unusual in history. We've seen us move from bow and arrows through to crossbows, through to muskets, through to rifles. Things adapt and change, and warfare forces that change to happen very quickly. Investment money has a power all of its own. The US and the cost-saving benefit that you get with this, using these cheap drones with cheap weapons on them, for a few $1,000s you can destroy a vehicle that's worth millions of dollars, or a military capability that's worth millions of dollars, and therefore that sits well with those in the Treasury who are paying for weapon systems. US investment in it will be huge, and that'll take what the Ukrainians have developed to the next level. And it's not just Ukrainians and Russians, but Ukrainians are probably the more advanced of the countries in developing drone technology. And they're probably the biggest military drone manufacturer in the world at the moment. The US is learning its lessons from that. It'll learn what it needs to do into its own defense industrial base, but it has to build up that defense industrial base to meet what then its troops are trained and ready to take away and operate in the ever-changing battlefield area. And I think we're going to see changes in the different organizations that will be deployed. So the Americans are not just going to have their infantry, their armored cavalry, their engineers. They're almost certainly going to have specialist drone units that are going to be integrated with that in providing what we describe as the all-arms battle. The traditional role of unmanned expensive drones is something I think people will look at very closely indeed, and we'll see the really expensive ones, the ones that fly very, very high, the ones that are sort of almost in between satellites and fixed-wing aircraft, still developing. They've still got a place. They've got sensors and they can linger on targets for very long periods of time. Often they're stealth, but we're seeing the Americans having trouble with the Reaper drones over Yemen as they carry out attacks with the Houthis. The Houthis have shot a number of them down, and they're becoming increasingly vulnerable. But there'll still be a place for the very expensive, very high level, the big drones, the effectively unmanned aircraft that can loiter over targets, that can deploy over very long distances, but they'll be complemented more by drones that are operating at different levels, and now down to drones that are operating in the battle space, traditionally that area that is infantry, cavalry, artillery dominated. There will be a drone force in there to deal with and bring these new weapon systems to bear.